Go ahead.
Okay. It's pretty intense. This one actually was very interesting because even as I was hearing it from the Lord, you guys were speaking it. So praise the Lord. Okay. The first thing I saw was a landscape, and it was desert mountains off to the right. And then as I looked off and panned to the left, it went down into a valley, a desert valley. And I believe this was in the east. But in this desert valley, there was a subdivision. There was a house track. And these house track, had manicured lawns, these houses row by row by row. And you can see that it was just almost like an oval shape, they're just in their little subdivision. Cars, just nicely well maintained. And then out of the right side, up the mountainside, come these giant warriors. And they're dressed in old warrior type clothing. And they're huge. They've got these huge hands and they've got swords. This is a little PG-13, by the way. They come down the mountainside and they go into this subdivision. And they find these people. They pull them out of their homes. But the humans, they're almost like dolls. So these guys, these giants come, they take their swords and they slice these men right down the middle. And it's as if they're looking for something. They reach into these men and they pull it out. And at first it looks like stuffing, like they're dolls, like stuffing. They start to pull it out. And so I just asked the Lord, I said, Lord, what are they pulling out? And so I kind of come up over this giant and I can see down what he's looking at. And this guy's huge compared to these little doll men. And you can see, and I'm going to describe this a little bit to what it looks like. As he's pulling this out, it almost looks like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a child snowflake, how they cut it into all these pieces and they pull it out and it's all webbed together. Does that make sense to anyone? Sort of like a giant, okay. Okay. So he pulls it out and it looks like this and it's webbed together. And I was like, Lord, what is that? And they look like tiny little squares. And when he showed me close up, it was almost like each individual little piece was written on. Like it was each like a little tablet with something written on it. And I sort of looked up and I saw that every single giant had one of these humans in their hands and they were doing the exact same thing. They were pulling this stuff out of this man. Well, then the giant, he finds what he's looking for and it's one of these little squares and he takes it and he cuts it off. He cuts it away and he grabs it. And you can just see that this is happening with everyone. And all of a sudden you can see that he has it in his hand. It's so tiny in his hand and he begins to like rub it with his thumb and it kind of goes away. But you can see all of a sudden that these are not giants and they're not man, they're angels because they have these huge wings. And they take off and they just fly straight up to heaven. And you can almost see them penetrate through into the spiritual realm. And when they get up into heaven, sort of greeted by this creature with wings, it sort of looks like a mountain lion or something with wings, and it's got this platter. And the angels, they bow down and they put these little pieces of paper platter.
Mm.
And I looked around in heaven, and it almost looked like it was stormy in there for some reason. I don't know if that was just my mind or what, but it looked like there was like a storm in heaven.
In a whirlwind.
Anyway.
Mm.
What's that?
In a whirlwind.
It was stormy.
Yes.
Yeah, it was stormy in there.
Mm.
So these angels, they're kneeling down, and you can see that Jesus has come. And he's approached, and he's standing next to this creature. And he reaches out, and he grabs all these papers, and he opens his chest, and he puts it into his heart, and he shuts it. And this light comes from him. This white light comes from him, from the inside of him, and he just shuts these papers in. And then I started to wonder, I got to figure out the series of how this went down really quick. Yes, okay. And then, so then Jesus, he points down. Yes, he points down, and you can begin to see that this desert valley, these mountains, all where the mountainside was, that was originally off to the off to the right-hand side, this mountain, and then it went down into the valley over to the left. He points down to where sort of the mountains are, and they start to come down into a valley, and you can see that from the earth is breaking up, and out of the earth are shooting these deep, dark, luscious green trees, just this beautiful, beautiful garden. And it's coming up, and it's coming up everywhere, just breaking forth this life, all this life. And then it gets over to where this housing track is. And you can see inside the housing track, and the roads start to crumble, and the buildings start to crumble, and cars start to go into the ground. And this place is literally taken down into the depths of the earth. It is just like, you can see a wide crevice opening, and this whole city is falling inside of the earth, and it closes it up like a seam, like a surgeon would sew up a wound. Just sewed up the ground, and it's perfectly, everything's gone, and all that's left are these men. And where that subdivision was is just dry land. And so you can see these men, and there's still these dolls, these sewn dolls. I'm very clear that they're sewn. I don't know. Anyway, and so there's one that's in the forefront, and the rest are kind of behind him. And he bends down on his knees, and he picks up the sand, and he's kind of holding it in his hand like, I don't know what he's thinking. Like, what just happened? I don't know what he's thinking. But he's holding this sand, and he's like, I feel like either I was like, what's next? Or he was like, what's next? What do I do now? Okay. And then you can see where the thing I was telling you about before, the luscious green garden, is off to the right, and then it kind of swoops down, and now where the men were, where the subdivision were, is all sand. Well, if you look off even further into the left, the sand becomes scorched ground, where it's black. And if you kind of look up, you can see it's all enemy territory.
Yeah.
It's scorched ground. There's redness and orange, and there's evil. You can see like demons and dragons and snakes, and just evil. You could see this. And so then you go back to this man, and he's standing there sort of right in the middle of this evil and this luscious garden. And he's like, okay, holding the sand, and he looks up to heaven, and he stretches his arm up. And all the other men do the same, and they stretch their arm up. And all of a sudden they're taken up into the realm of the Lord, the spiritual realm of the Lord. And where Jesus is. And each one of them bows down before the Lord. Then the Lord has this sword of fire. And he has this sword of fire, and he comes to the kneeled men, and he lays the sword on the back of this man. And it begins to burn away who he once was into this like a real boy. Almost felt like Pinocchio. He was a real boy, but he was this strong man, a warrior. You could see that, just a strong man. And he continued to be knelt before the Lord. And then he went on to go to the men behind him. But when he laid his flaming sword upon these men, they turned to dust. They turned to black dust. And this fell through the clouds. They were gone. Each one. And I was like, Lord, are there any left? I was so sad that there was only one. So he began to lay the sword, and one by one, they just turned to ash. Well, then you can see this man, this one, he stood up strong. He was very strong. And he had a warrior's outfit on. And he returned to earth, and he had a sword. And he walked up to the line where this basically separated this line between where, evil was and where he was standing. And I expected him to like rush forward into this evil and start battling. But when he raised his sword and he slashed in front of him, it was like a mirror of glass. He slashed through this glass, this mirror, and it crumbled. And there was nothing behind it. There was no enemy. There was no nothing. It was just this mirage, it seemed like, because it just fell to the ground. And when it fell down, you could see that the ground behind him was still red and scorched, but there was no enemy. There was no enemy there to be found. It was just bare land. And the man, he knelt, he stabbed his sword into the ground, and he just knelt in humility. He just knelt before the Lord. And in prayer or in whatever, and held his hand up, his right hand up, and just was worshiping the Lord. And that is when heaven came to earth. You could just see the glory is light. The light is just the glory, I guess. I don't know, but the whole light came down, and it just covered this entire red, dark, scorched land. It was so bright and so beautiful, and like the throne room of God came forward, and Jesus came forward to this man that was knelt and put a crown on him and just embraced him, and that's where it ended.